States and their capitals, Part 4. Now, we're going to move a little bit west of Minnesota. And when we do, we find a state called North Dakota. And we're going to talk about North Dakota and South Dakota, which is directly south of North Dakota. So, let's get your directions straight here. We know that Minnesota is next to Wisconsin. Okay? And we already know that if you go west of Minnesota, you find North Dakota. If you go south of North Dakota, you find South Dakota. So how were the capitals of North and South Dakota named? Well, it just happens that there was a German Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck, which his last name became the name of the capital of North Dakota. And you ought to check out Otto von Bismarck, because you might find a very fascinating story. Okay, what about South Dakota? Well, Pierre is the South Dakota capital name. You say, well, where does Pierre, South Dakota come from? Well, there was once a place called Fort Pierre. So you mean there was actually a Fort Pierre? Yes, and that turned into Pierre, South Dakota. And, hang on just a second, I got hair in my eye. There we go. That's better. Fort Pierre was named after a fur trader named Pierre Charteau Jr. And hopefully I got this right. His name is actually spelled Chouteau. I'll say that again. Chouteau. And this Pierre was also a junior. Okay, so there was obviously a senior Pierre as well. Alright, now, not too far away from South Dakota is a place called Nebraska. That's right, there is a state called Nebraska, and the capital of Nebraska is actually Abraham Lincoln, Nebraska. That's right, Lincoln, Nebraska was named after Abraham Lincoln because he was assassinated shortly before the city was named, and therefore, anyway. Alright, directly underneath Nebraska is a place called Kansas. And actually there is a singing group by the same name, Kansas. And I'm pretty sure they come from Kansas. But that helps you remember the name of the state. It doesn't help you remember the name of the capital of the state. So, what is the name of the state capital of Kansas? Well, it just happens to be Topeka. And Topeka happens to be an Indian word. And this means to dig good potatoes. Who would be thinking about digging good potatoes in Kansas? Interesting. Anyway, let's go on. If you were to go a little further east from, a little further west from Texas, okay, we're going to Texas now. We already know that Austin is the capital of Texas. We already know that story. Now, if we go a little further west, we found a state called New Mexico. And it has a capital known as Santa Fe. But that was not the original name of Santa Fe. Santa Fe was not the original name of that city. It was actually named by a Pedro de Peralta, and I may have not pronounced his name right, Pedro de Peralta, and this guy named the city. This is the actual name of the city. It was La Villa Rio de la Santa Fe de San Francisco de Osos. That was the real name. La Villa Rio de la Santa Fe de San Francisco de Osos. And I may have mispronounced some of that. I'm sorry if I did. Okay, but you get the idea. That was a very long name. They finally condensed that name, and it became Santa Fe, New Mexico. Alright. The Colorado state capital was named after James W. Denver. James W. Denver his last name became the name of the state capital of Colorado. So if you go to Colorado, you will see James W. Denver and his city. Alright, now what about Wyoming? Well, Wyoming's state capital was named after the Cheyenne Indians. That's just the way it is. And as for Oklahoma, well, Oklahoma was named, the state capital of Oklahoma is Oklahoma City. So you have Oklahoma State, you have Oklahoma City. Woohoo! Okay, that's a simple one to remember. Helena, Montana. There's a little different story. There were actually two towns known as Helena, but they were pronounced a little differently. The pronunciation of Helena, Arkansas, okay, is correct for Arkansas. But there is also a town called Helena, Minnesota. Okay? And there was one guy that wanted Helena, Minnesota to be the name of this town in Montana. Okay? And there were some Confederate soldiers who said, you ain't doing this. We're going to name this thing Helena after our favorite town of Helena, Arkansas. So some people were pronouncing it Helena, and the other ones pronouncing it Helena, and finally they just buried the hatchet one day and said, alright, it's Helena, that's it. So Helena, Montana is what we're talking about here. Montana is the state, Helena is the capital. Okay, now what about Boise, Idaho? Well, Idaho is famous for its potatoes. Of course, it's famous for other things too, but it's famous for its potatoes. But the word Boise actually means woods or wooded area. Now, nobody knows exactly how Boise got its name, but they do know that if you defined Boise, you would get woods or wooded area. Alright? And that's all I'm going to say on this particular video. There will be one more states and their capitals, and then we'll go on to world geography, and I'll tell you about the other side of the world. Stay tuned.